that the Jewish people are going to live in the diaspora for who knows how long. And therefore, they need a whole different structure of davening, which will keep them together. And he basically introduced three major transformational aspects of Tefillah. First of all, Ezra wrote a text. He wrote the Siddur. He didn't write the complete Siddur as we have it today, but the core of the Tefillah, the core of brachas and Shemana Esra and Birkas Kriya Shema, as we'll see. These brachas were written by Ezra together with Anshe Knesset Agdola, and therefore suddenly the Jewish people had not only a mitzvah of davening, but they had a text to daven. This wasn't just about tefillah, but tefillah in shul, incidentally. So, for example, there is a mitzvah that we're all familiar with of saying Kiddush on Friday night. Prior to Ezra, what did people say on Friday night when you sat down to the meal on Friday night? You knew there was a mitzvah of Kiddush. How did you know that? Because you had learnt the 613 mitzvahs were well known in Klal Yisrael, and one of them is Zochar es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha. That when Shabbos comes in, you have to commemorate its arrival. How do you do that? Before Ezra came along, the answer was you did it any way that you felt was relevant, and you made up your own nusach. You wrote your own poem. So, for example, you might sat down on Friday night and said, Yom Zeh Mechubad Mikol HaYomim Kibo Shavas Sur Olamim. And by saying that, you fulfill the mitzvah of Zochar as Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha. In fact, all the Zemiros that we have are variations on how to fulfill the mitzvah of Zochar as Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsha. What happened was Ezra came along and he said, it's time to standardize this across the board, globally for the Jewish people. We're going to give you a text. And he gave us a text, what we call the Friday Night Kiddush. Friday Night Kiddush is was authored by Ezra with the help of the Anshe Knesset Agdola. And since then, for the last 2,500 years, Klal Yisrael on Friday night say that text, the text of Kiddush. But it's important to realize that this was a great innovation and a great change. The first thing he did was he gave us a text. The second thing he did was he gave us Lashon HaKodesh, the Hebrew language, which he heavily emphasized as the best way to daven, not the only way to daven, but the best way to daven was in the Hebrew language. And the third thing he gave us was Tefillah B'tzibur, the idea of getting together with a community and davening and creating a Beit HaKnesses and creating a Kehillah. These were the three great innovations of Ezra Sefer, which arguably transformed not only the mitzvah of Tefillah, but in a sense used the mitzvah of Tefillah to transform Jewish life. Jewish life after Ezra was almost unrecognizable to Jewish life before Ezra. And one of the reasons was what I've just now said, the three transformations of Tefillah. Because the truth is, the Rambam will tell you, that Tefillah is, in essence, if we strip away all the additions to Tefillah, Tefillah is in essence an extremely personal connection of every man and woman individually to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On that mitzvah, we have superimposed a text and a tzibur, a community and a kehillah, and various other things, the Hebrew language. But actually, the mitzvah in and of itself, stripped down to its bare essence, the mahut of the mitzvah, is a personal connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every human being is able to connect personally to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that was a great chiddush. That was one of the great chidushim, one of the great innovative ideas of Jewish life, which went against all other religions. All other religions in the ancient world believed, even when they believed that there was a God, and they all believed in God or gods, they believed that we needed intermediaries. We needed various idols, we needed various saviors, we needed various different type of saints and other people who were intermediaries between us and God. because we, the ordinary person, can't connect directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? That was a belief, universal belief, before Judaism came along and said, no, there is a mitzvah of tefillah, and that mitzvah is that you can stand in your back garden, focus your mind, stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you are able to connect without any intermediaries. In fact, intermediaries are Avodah Zarah. In the Rambam's 13 Ikrim, his 13 principles of Jewish faith, one of them is not to daven to any intermediaries, no malachim and no stars and no tzaddikim and no neshamas. All those things are there and they're important for us. But when we daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's immediate. It's immediate in the sense of it's without any external conduits. That is in essence the mitzvah of tefillah. And then, if we understand that, then we'll go further in the in our shir. But that was, it's interesting, sometimes by studying history and by studying what Ezra added to the mitzvah of tefillah, we are then able to go to rewind this film backwards and study what was the essence of tefillah before the additions were made. And by doing that, we can understand something better about what tefillah is really about. Since we are now today Rosh Chodesh Av, and we're into that period of the year, I'd just like to, before we get into the tefillah issue proper, I'd like to share with you one pasuk and a particular idea on that pasuk, which is relevant to Tisha B'Av and this time of year. So I'm sharing a screen. Can you see the screen? Give me a thumbs up. Can you see the screen? Yes, good. Henry Israel's given me a thumbs up, so I know that all is well. Okay, so the screen is a single pasuk from Yeshaya chapter 62. Reading Yeshaya is really one of the things one should do during the 3 weeks. The Navi Yeshaya has got the most amazing insights into the whole concept, both of the Churban. This week, of course, we're going to have on Shabbos the Haftorah of Yeshaya chapter 1, Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos, right? The Chazon, the vision that Yeshaya had. Yeshaya was standing in Yerushalayim with a king, with Tzion built, and the Beis HaMikdash fully functional, and he had a vision. He saw through Nevuah that the spiritual nature of the Jewish people was deteriorating such that the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, which wouldn't happen for another 100 years, that the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash was almost inevitable unless they did tshuva. And that's what Chazon is all about. So Yeshaya has the most amazing insights, both into the future and into the ultimate future. I'd like to look at this pasuk with you. You might recognize this pasuk because it's the famous psukim of Yeshaya. Whenever I say a pasuk in Yeshaya is famous, what I mean is it's a song, that people have sung it as a song. All the songs of Yeshaya are famous because Yeshaya itself, sadly, is not very well studied, not in hardly any institutes of Jewish learning. Excuse me. Let's have a look at this pasuk. Al chomosayich Yerushalayim hifkadati shomrim. Upon your walls, O Jerusalem, I have set shomrim. Shomrim are watchmen, guards. Kol hayom v'kol halayla. Tomid lo yecheshu. They will never be silent by day or by night. Hamazkirin as Hashem. You who remember HaKadosh Baruch Hu, al domi loch. Do not be silent. What is he referring to? What is Yeshaya talking about? Who are the Shomrei Yerushalayim? Who are the Shomrei, the Shomrim that Yeshaya is talking about? So, Baruch Hashem, today, in the world we live in today, we have Shomrim who are Chayalim. We have Chayalim, we have our soldiers. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should look after them and protect them from all our enemies. But they are the Shomrei HaChomot. They are guarding the walls of Yerushalayim. And they're guarding Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael, enabling us to live in peace as we do. Enabling us to have this shir and to come and live in Yerushalayim, because we have, Baruch Hashem, an army that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given the strength and the wisdom to protect the Jewish people. But what was Yeshaya talking about? So Rashi goes down a midrashic line that the Shomrim are Malachim, certain types of angels. But I would like to quote my ancestor. Some of you might know that my ancestor was the Radak, David Kimche. David Kimche, who lived in the 13th century, who lived in Provence, in the town of Narbonne. Provence, the south of France. I suppose if you've got to live somewhere in Golos, south of France is not a bad place. Not a bad place to choose if you've got to live somewhere. The Kimche family lived for many generations in Provence until the 1500s, when they were expelled and they went to live in Russia and Lithuania. And my family are Lithuanians for the last 400 or 500 years. But initially, 800 years ago, the Radak was writing in Provence, and he wrote one of the most definitive commentaries on the Tanakh. The Radak on Tanakh is the most amazing and inspirational commentary. What does he say here on this passage? So he says the Chomosayach Yerushalayim, Efgadati Shomrim, the Shomrim, he says, are people, ladies and gentlemen, like you and me, who are able to sit on the floor on Tisha B'Av and remember Yerushalayim. The Avelei Tziyah of every generation are the people, they are the Shomrim Kol Hayom V'Kol Halayla. Day and night, we remember Yerushalayim, and we recall the Churban, and we recall the fact that we're living in Golus. In other words, it's because Klal Yisrael had Tisha B'Av and Shavos B'Tammuz, and because we mention in our davening Yerushalayim Ircha V'Sechzeno Einenu Uvnei Yerushalayim, these commemorations of Yerushalayim, we are in every generation the Shomrei Chomot Yerushalayim. We are preserving Yerushalayim. How is that possible? Because think about it. If the Jewish people would have gone into the diaspora, and in every country they went to, they would have come to terms with the diaspora and say, okay, here we live. This is where we're going to live forever. Right? This is where we're now going to live in Alexandria. We're going to live in Yemen. We're going to live in Tunisia. We're going to live in Iraq. We're going to live in Golders Green. We're going to live in Borough Park. This is where we are. This is where we're going to live. If that would have been the attitude, there would never have been a Shivat Zion. There'd never be a state of Israel and the return to the land of Israel. The return to the land of Israel has only been possible because every generation have reminded themselves and told their children, every year we're going to sit on the floor and we're going to think about the fact that we shouldn't really be here. We should be in Eretz Yisrael. And even if we are in Israel, we shouldn't really be living like this. We should live with a Beis HaMikdash and Kohanim and Leviim. That says the Radak, the Avelei Tziyah, the people who are able to mourn for the Churban, they are in fact the Shomrei HaChomot. They have guarded the walls of Yerushalayim such that it's never been forgotten. Incidentally, some of you might know the history of the so-called Reform Judaism movement in the early 1800s, when they built their first temples, they called them temples, in Hamburg and in Berlin. One of the very first things they did was they edited the Jewish Siddur. It's an interesting historical fact that the Reform movement, initially, the first thing they did was they rewrote the Siddur. And what were they interested to do? What was their paramount goal in the very beginning to do to the Siddur? Because the Reform movement believed in God and believed in prayer to God. But the first thing they did was they deleted out of the Siddur all the references to Yerushalayim and to Israel and to Mashiach. And they said, we are not waiting to go back to the land of Israel. We are proud German Jews. We will be here in Germany forever and a day. That didn't go so well, did it? They went that we're going to be here forever and ever, right? And we're not going to remember Yerushalayim. We're not going to mourn over Yerushalayim. All that is ancient nonsense, right? That was the first thing that the Reform did to the Siddur. They deleted Yerushalayim Ircha, V'Sechazeno Eineinu B'Shuv Chalatzion. We don't believe in a return to Israel. We're here and we're always going to be here. Judaism is a wonderful set of values and beliefs, but Israel and Yerushalayim is ancient history, nothing to do with us. It was as relevant to them as ancient, ancient pagan burial sites in the world, meant nothing to them at all. And they deleted Yerushalayim and deleted Israel. The early reform movement was very anti-Zionistic because they felt that the return to Zion was actually a return to the past, was a return to medievalism and the ancient world. Where Klal Yisrael, Ad Hayom Hazeh, comes Shavuos B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, we sit down and say, look, we remember that without Eretz Yisrael, without Yerushalayim, and without ultimately the Beis HaMikdash, we're living in a world which is not correct. The world as we know it is imperfect. And that's the Aveilus of this time of year. The mourning that we have on Shavuos B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av has been a tremendously powerful reminder of every single generation that we are, wherever we live, we are baderech. We're on our way back to Eretz Yisrael. We're back to Yerushalayim, and that's, says the Radak, that's what Yeshaya meant when he says, "Achol Messiah Yerushalayim Nefkarati Shemrim Kol Hayom Kol Halayla." Day and night, we recall Yerushalayim in our benching, Yerushalayim Kodesh, right? And our davening, and everything that we say has that element to it. And therefore, one shouldn't feel. Some people feel that Tisha B'Av, who needs Tisha B'Av today? We're back in Eretz Yisrael. That is a complete misunderstanding. It's only because of Tisha B'Av that we have Eretz Yisrael. It's only because of the Avelei Tzion of 2,500 years that we are commemorating and remembering Yerushalayim morning, afternoon, and evening, that we have still got that homing instinct to come back to the land of Israel. That is the one of the crew. That's what the Radak says. These are the Chamotayach Yerushalayim Ifkadati Shabbat. Okay, that's that's what I wanted to share with you. A pasuk from Yeshaya, and now we can go to the main topic of these shiurim, which is Tefila. So I'd like to learn with you. I hope to have time today to learn with you one or two substantive parts of the Siddur, but I'd like to look with you at one or two lines of Chazal, which are key ideas in our understanding of what Tefillah really is and how to approach the idea of Tefillah. So here we have, you can see from the text in front of you, this comes from the Maharal. The Maharal wrote one book called Netivot Olam. Netivot means the paths of Jewish life. And it's a book with 32 different Netivot, 32 different paths, each one a central topic of Jewish life. And this is Netiv HaAvodah. This is speaking the whole Netiv, a whole essay of many chapters dealing exclusively with Tefillah. So here in chapter 5, he starts off as follows. I just want to read with you this 1.5 lines. Mishleimut ha'avodah hazot. How does one achieve not just davening, which is, if you like, a reflex activity of reading text from a siddur, but shleimut avodah hazot? How do we do it properly? The word shleimut means to do something in the best way possible. That our tefillah should be shalem in some sense. That it should be complete. Mishleimut avodah hazot he. And here I've underlined a line. Omer Rab Chizda. So this is a Gemara in Brachas Daf Ches, and it's a typical line of the Talmud, which at face value is enigmatic. We don't know what it means. It's a mysterious line in the Talmud, and it's open to interpretation. And I'm going to read with you the interpretation the Maharal gave it 400 years ago when the Maharal was writing, 450 years ago when the Maharal was writing in Prague. how he understood this one line in the Gemara in Brachas. So the Gemara says, Omar Rav Chizda. You can see I've highlighted this text. Rav Chizda said, Le'olam yikanes Adam shnei petachim v'achar kach yitpalel. A person, I've translated it here, every person must go through two doors, petachim, two doorways, a petach, right? V'achar kach yitpalel, and then he can pray. So what are these two doors that you need to go through in order to daven? And you can imagine that this has lots of different. The Shulchan Aruch, incidentally, brings this line down in the Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Tefila and says that it simply means that when you come into shul, you shouldn't stand right next to the door and daven, because it looks as if you can't wait to get out again. It's not respectful to walk into shul and stand right next to the door. You should go shnei petachim, means you should go through the door and then ki'ilu, go through another door, which means enter the Beit HaKnesset properly and fully without having an escape route, emphasizing your desire to get out. Okay. So he says, let's have a look at a little bit from the Maral. I hope you can. You can see it when I highlight it. You can see the highlighted text. Good. Upirush zeh. What does it mean? Right? If you just go through one door, ein hapetach ha'echad more rak al hasiluk mibachutz bilvat. One door simply means that you've left behind the outside world. Hainu, what does it mean? Shul basalik atzmo mikol iskei ha'olam. Going through a door and closing the door behind you is symbolic of leaving behind all what he calls iskei ha'olam. All your this worldly thoughts and feelings have to be put on hold. But he says, Ve'ein zeh hityachadut legamrei im Hashem Yisbarach. But it's still just meditating, if you like. Some of the Eastern meditations, I've had Talmidim of mine over the years who've gone to the East and they've meditated and they've learned how to meditate in the East. But when I ask them, so what are you meditating? So they say, we're meditating to clear out our mind and clear out our heads and clear out our thoughts, to be completely clear. So the question is, and what then? What do you do then with a completely cleared out and relaxed and empty mind? What do you do with it? No, the answer is that's the goal. The goal is to live a state of where you've disconnected from this worldly activities, you've disconnected from all your anxieties and everything, and you're just living that in that frame of mind. Says the Maharal, that's very nice, but that's half the story. That is something that we should do to indeed clear our mind out of all worldly thoughts. But he says that's not the second door. The second door, look what I've highlighted here. Ve'ein zeh hityachadut legamri im Hashem Yisbarach. But you haven't yet meditated on the fact that Shivisi Hashem lenegdi sameh, that you're standing before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shetzorich el zeh shnei devarim. So here comes his explanation to this piece of Gemara. He says what you need to do for Tefillah is two things. Ha'echad hasiluk mikol ha'dvarim. One door you go through, so it's for the Maharal, the doors that the Gemara are talking about are doors in your brain. They're not doors in the shul. They're doors in your brain. There's one door you need to go through and go through it and close it behind you. And by closing it behind you, it's what he calls this, ha'echad hasiluk mikol ha'dvarim. You are misalek. You are removing yourself from other worldly thoughts, whether you've got plans for the future or goals for the future or appointments that you're planning to do later on in the day. All that is put on hold. Or you could have anxieties about the past or regrets or hostility, whatever it is. All that has to be in some way, you have to close the door on that. Vasheni, and the second door, is Lisyachet im Hashem Yisparach, Hashem Yisparach Leilo. To open a door to feel and to understand that you're standing before HaKadosh Baruch directly. The Ein Zeh below Zeh. That's what he writes here. And that's what the Gemara wants to explain here. The Ein Zeh below Zeh. You can't have one without the other. In other words, you can't stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu if in your mind there's all sorts of, if you like, noise. There's mental noise going on in your mind, anxieties and regrets and plans and thoughts and reflections and unfinished business. All unfinished business, you have to close the door on that. And then you have to focus on standing for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ein Zeh below Zeh. Says Maharal, why not? This is what the Gemara means here. She'em ein masalik atzmo mikol hadvarim shehem bachutz, unless you're able to sort of to be masalek, to put aside. He doesn't mean to cancel it. You need to put it on hold. Now is not to deal with that now. Shehem bachutz af shehu podel Hashem Yisbarach mispalel. If he stands and davens, yesh kan iruv hamakshava. What will happen is your thoughts will be all iruv. Iruv, everyone knows the word iruv from the word eruv. Who doesn't know what is an eruv? I personally, I have nightmares about an eruv. Having fought a battle in London for 15 years about the eruv. But the word eruv simply means to mix things together, to mix different things together. In modern Hebrew, ayin resh bet, la'arev means a mixture, right? When you're baking a cake and you're mixing all the ingredients, that's la'arev, that's an iruv. So the mixture, and when you're making an eruv, what you're doing is you're taking all the different private properties of different households inside the area, and you're mixing them together into one jointly owned cooperative domain. And it's no longer private and public, it all is one giant cooperative. That's the idea, the underlying idea of the whole concept of the Eruv. But the Eruv means a mixture. But here, what is the mixture? He says, Yeshkan Eruv HaMachshava. Your mind is all a mix-up. And who doesn't know that? One of the biggest problems that every human being, every man and woman who has tried to daven, everybody has is that one's mind tends to drift and think about things that are happening, that have happened, that could happen, that you're afraid will happen, things that your memories and whatever, dreams, etc., images come into you, you can't focus. So Tefillah actually requires, says the Maharal, going through two doors in order to focus. One door is, you have to consciously say to yourself, all my plans and appointments and thoughts and anxieties and everything, I'm pressing the on hold button. They're not relevant at the moment. That's door number one. I'm closing that door. The next door is, I'm standing before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and God is listening to me. But you need both. He says, V'im masalek atzmo, if you do manage to close the door on all the other worldly thoughts, so what have you done? So I said, that's the Eastern religions. What have they done? Adayin tzarech sheyischaber. He says here, Adayin tzarech sheyischaber im Hashem Yisbarach. What you still need to do is the second gate, which is lehitchaber. It's a very beautiful word that he uses, which is actually a very modern concept as well, even though the Maharal is writing, as I say, 450 years ago. Nevertheless, his concepts are part of the modern world. He says, when you're davening, you are mitchaber im Hashem. If somebody asks you, what are you doing when you're davening? The answer is you're connecting to something greater than yourself. You're connecting to something which is infinite. You're connecting to the ultimate source and the ultimate purpose of the world and of life. That is lehitchaber. We all know what it means, litchaber, right? You can connect to the Wi-Fi system, you can connect, put a plug in the wall and connect to the electricity system. Whenever you connect, by connecting, you're becoming part of something massive, right? Connecting to the World Wide Web. When you're davening, you're connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is a special mitzvah, and it's a privilege. And in a sense, it's a great, say in terms of other world religions, it's a great chiddush that it's possible for us to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu without any intermediaries, without any shlichim, without any malachim, right? Even to daven to malachim, we have one or two tefillas in our siddur which were quite controversial. Right? I don't know if you're aware of this, right? But some of our tefillas, we have, for example, the poem that everybody says on Friday night. For the last 500 years, since the Mekubolim in Tzfat, every Jewish home on Friday night says Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hashares, Malachei Elyon, and that's very nice to say Shalom Aleichem, to welcome the Malachim. Boyachem L'Shalom, you should come in peace, and we welcome you. That's also very nice. But the third stanza of that tefillah is very controversial, and there are many people, particularly here in Yerushalayim, who don't say Baruch Huni L'Shalom, because Baruch Huni L'Shalom means we're asking the Malachim to give us a bracha, and that goes against many principles of Torah thought that we don't ask Malachim for brachas. We only ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly for a bracha. We don't daven to the Malach, and the Malach should be the source of bracha for us. That's not something we're willing to. So in fact, there are people who sing Shalom Aleichem, but they leave out Baruch Huni L'Shalom. I'm not suggesting that you do this, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure you've been saying Baruch Huni L'Shalom for many years already, and that's probably well ingrained. And if you skipped it out, your family would have a major shock. But you should just know that it's controversial. And when you say Baruch Huni L'Shalom, your kavanah has to be not that the Malachim are going to bring us a bracha, but that the Malachim will in fact be will witness, if you like, the brachas that come down from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Fortunately, most people when they sing Shalom Aleichem are actually thinking about nothing. Either the fact that they're a bit hungry, and when are they going to make Kiddush, and that we're soon going to sit down for the meal. So Baruch Hashem, there isn't much apikoros involved. But were somebody to actually reflect on Baruch Huni L'Shalom and have the kavanah that I'm now davening to the Malachim, that these Malachim should themselves give me a bracha, that actually for the Rambam would be a violation of one of the Shloshes Re'ikrim, one of the fundamental beliefs of the Torah, that we don't have any intermediaries in our tefillas between us and HaKadosh Baruch. And that's what the Maharal is saying here. This is the single word that I've highlighted here on the page. Sheyitchaber im Hashem Yisparach. That tefillah is a moment where we are connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly. And he says, that's why the Gemara says we need to go through two gates. What are the two gates? HaKnisa, the Petach Echad, he is Stalkus V'chutz. The first gate is to close the door on our worldly thoughts and our anxieties and our plans and ideas, and then, right? And to be able to put all that, to quieten the mind in order to put all that apart. About Knisa B'Shenis, and the second gate, he says, what is the Knisa B'Shenis? He lefnim lehisyached im Hashem Yisparach, to get inside. Lefnim, right? Lefnim means to go like the Kohen Gadol went into the Kodesh Kodashim, to go right inside Lityached im HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be. So it's actually interesting. Lityached means to be alone with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even though our davening, we tend to think our davening is b'tzibur, but the Maharal is coming back to what I mentioned earlier, that in essence, tefillah is not a communal activity. In essence, tefillah is a very personal, individual connection between you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, between me and God. That connection is at all possible, and that it can be articulated, and that you can engage in that on a daily basis. That is the pele, the amazing thing which we call a tefillah, right? And a lot of the psukim that we say in Psukim de Zimra, the beginning of the tefillah, is just to remind ourselves. Right? We say, for example, in Ashrei, there is a line in Ashrei which is particularly relevant to what I'm saying now. In Ashrei, we say, Koroiv Hashem l'chol kairov l'chol asher yikra'uhu ve'emes. So what does that pasuk mean? It means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is close by. Karov is close by. L'chol korav, to all those who call out to him. In other words, every man and woman who davens HaKadosh Baruch Hu is L'chol asher yikra'uhu be'emet. If a person does it be'emet, he does it with sincerity and with emunah and with focus. It doesn't say with a tzibur. It doesn't say with singing. It doesn't say with a sidur. It says kol asher yikra'uhu be'emet. So a person, an individual person, has a tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu be'emet. He's able to hitchaber, to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a one-to-one basis. And that is the big philosophical and theological innovation of the mitzvah of tefillah. And whatever else we say about tefillah, that is the foundational idea. Okay, I'd like to have a look at two brachas that we start off the day with. And these two brachas are particularly important. And let me give you just a brief introduction to these two brachas. I've written here weekday shacharis, two preparatory prayers, body and soul. And actually, the morning, our davening starts with morning brachas. And in our morning brachas, we're actually not asking for anything. People make a mistake to think that tefillah is about petitioning HaKadosh Baruch Hu and asking for something to happen. There is in tefillah, there is that voice as well. There is parts of tefillah which are Rafa'inu Hashem B'nei Rafei, which we're asking for refuah, we're asking for parnasa, we're asking for B'Yerushalayim Iricha Barachamim Toshuv. There are things we're asking for. But a lot of our davening is not about asking for anything. It's about gratitude. It's about thanksgiving to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and acknowledging that what we have is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in that sense, if one asked a fundamental question about what is really the goal of our tefillah, the goal of our tefillah isn't, so to speak, to tell God something he didn't know beforehand, or to convince him to do something he wasn't going to do beforehand. That is a very childish approach to tefillah. The approach to tefillah has to be, we're doing it in order to remind ourselves of our emunah, of the world that we live in, that we're living in God's world, and that everything that we've got is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And these two brachas are a particularly important way to start off the day. And for many of you, these will be very familiar, but just because they're familiar doesn't mean that they're insignificant, right? We start off the day with these two brachas. One of them is, right, the bracha that we say, having relieved oneself in the morning, or indeed any time during the day, but particularly in the morning, we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for what? Asher yotzar es ha'odam b'chachma. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the human being with chachma, with wisdom. In other words, that our human body is functioning. You wake up in the morning, what's the first thing you feel? Hopefully, that your body is functioning. Right? If it isn't functioning, then it's a problem. Then it's a problem. Then you need to go and get it sorted out. But even when you go and sort it out, you can still make this bracha because lots of other things are functioning. Because if we didn't, right? So the language of this bracha is always very, very fascinating. Obaro Bo, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created in our world nekovim, chalulim, openings and organs and tubes and veins and arteries and all sorts of different miraculous systems. Right? The system of excretion is a miraculous system. The system of the blood and the immune system. At the moment, the immune system is the subject of study of the biggest academies of science in the world are breaking their heads trying to find a vaccine to try and help the immune system to fight this plague. And please God, we daven that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give chachma to the scientists and enable them to find a solution here. But in essence, the human body is something which has got the most remarkable. I was actually listening to a scientific program just a couple of months ago by a hematologist, somebody who's an expert, a world expert in the blood system. And everybody knows that, for example, if you have a cut or an infection on your finger, you get pus. You get sometimes the pus of what is that? These are white blood cells that come in order to fight against the infection, right? And the white blood cells protect the blood, protect it against infection, and then eventually close up the wounds and create a scab, and then eventually the skin grows back. And all that we take for granted. But he said there are aspects of this which science doesn't understand at all. So he says it's well documented that if you have, let's say, a cut or an infection in your finger, that white blood cells from all over your body rush to that point to fight the infection. What we want to know is, how do these blood cells know that they're needed and where to go to? How does this cut communicate with white blood cells that happen to be at the moment in your leg or in your other arm and tell them you are now needed on the finger of the left hand? Please make your way as fast as possible to this place in order to fight the infection. How do they communicate with each other? And we researched this for years and years, he said. And how there must be some sort of connection within the blood system that the body is able to give instructions. So we've looked at hormones, we've looked at whatever it is, how the blood communicates with various different parts of the body. We've got no idea how white blood cells, which are in a different part of the body, how do they, in inverted commas, know that they're needed elsewhere? And how do they know how to get there? It's quite complicated to get there through the vessels, through the blood system. And yet they do know, right? And this is just one detail out of billions of details in the balance within the body, the hormone balance, the blood pressure balance, the blood composition balance, which enables us to live. And that's what we're davening. So in the morning we get up and we say, Golu v'yodua lifnei kisei kvodecha. It is well known before you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that if one part of our body which should have been open is closed, or should have been closed is open, right? If one valve in the artery or in the heart or anywhere in the body is not functioning, we can't exist even for a moment. Afilu shah achas. This phrase, afilu shah achas, is actually a different minhagim whether you add in these last three words, afilu shah achas. And what are we doing? We are simply thanking HaKadosh Baruch. It's a moment of thankfulness. And what is interesting is, coming back to what the Maharal was saying before, it's a moment where we're actually saying, it doesn't matter what anxieties I've got about the day. It doesn't matter about what happened in the last month or what's going to happen in the next month. In the here and now. And this is a theme I'm going to be coming back to. One of the goals of Tefillah is something which in the modern world is called mindfulness. Chazal spoke about mindfulness. It means to be able to focus your mind on the here and now. In other words, all the anxieties and that you've got of the past are in the past. They don't exist anymore. And all the anxieties and plans and thoughts and goals you've got for the future are in the future. They also don't exist anymore. They don't exist yet. What is there now in the present? What is there in the present? So in the present is the fact that I'm alive and my body is functioning now, at this moment. What it'll be like in 5 minutes, I don't know. But in this moment, everything is functioning well, and I'm grateful. And I want to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is the source of all life. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Machalkel, Chayim, Chesed, is the source of all life. I want to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? And in the end, and this bracha ends up with a very interesting phrase, Baruch Atah Hashem, Rofei Kol Basar, that he heals the people who need healing, Umafli La'asot. This is a very interesting phrase. What does it mean, mafli? So he translates it as who performs wonders. Because mafli comes from the word pele, pei lamed aleph. Pele in modern Hebrew as well. Is a pele, which means how amazing is something. Pele. What is amazing? So on a simple level, the mafli la'asot means that if we think for a minute about our digestive system and our nutrition system and our immune system and the blood system and the nervous system and the brain cells and everything, and the more we understand about it, the more we realize what a pele it is and how thankful we are to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that it's all ticking over nicely. And that's the first thing we give thanks for, we have a fully functional body. But the first two brachas are not just about the body, they're also about the neshama. And here we have the second tefillah, which is one of the most beautiful short tefillahs of the whole day. We're acknowledging the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu endowed us not just with a body that works, but also with a neshama. A neshama is a spiritual force. And we're saying, first of all, the opening word here of this tefillah, Elohai, is very personal. We don't say Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosenu. We say Elohai, my God, my connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How do I have any connection at all to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The answer is neshama shenosata bi tahorei. The neshama, that's the SIM card that allows me to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Without that SIM card, we can't connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at all. We're just an animal. But we have got an animal body, but with a SIM card, which is a neshama. And that neshama connects us to a different world completely. And that neshama is tahoroi, is absolutely pure, which is interesting. You're waking up in the morning, and everybody can say this. Even somebody who possibly yesterday had done things which were wrong, done aveirus and done sins of various sorts, doesn't matter. The neshama remains tahoroi. The neshama remains absolutely pure, and it remains a source of pure spiritual inspiration. And then he uses here three words which are part of the Chumash, right? When Adam is created, it says "Vayivra Elokim es ha'adam," from the word bara. So we say "Ato barasa," and then the apostle says "Vayitzer Elokim es ha'adam." So we say "Ato yotzarta," and then he says "Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim." Ato nefachta bi. These three verbs, Ato barasa, Ato yotzarta, Ato nefachta, are a synopsis of the biblical account in Bereshis chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the creation of the human being. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the human being with more attention than anything else in the cosmos. Everything else in the universe was created. But when he finished creating the universe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created one more being. This was the human being who had an animal body with a neshama inserted in it. And for that, we need these three words. If we were learning Chumash, I would learn each one of these three words separately. One is Beria, Barasa, one is Yetzira, and the third is Nofachta. Nofachta means to insert within you. The neshama, Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. And not only that, Va'atom neshamra b'kirbi. And you are able to preserve that neshama within me, even though the human body is not the ideal place for the neshama. The neshama wants to live in a spiritual world, not in a physical world. Right? Incidentally, in the Medrash, you often find there's a midrashic image which appears in a few places. The Ramchal, or Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, refers to it in a couple of places, but it's originally in the Medrash. The Medrash speaks about a farmer who's had no education, whose only interest in the world is to get up in the morning and to feed the animals and to harvest and to work the land, and then he wants to get drunk, and he's got no refinement, and he's got no interests other than his own ego and his own agricultural work. And says the Medrash, he's married to a princess. He's married to a girl who's come from the royal house where she's had literature and music and refinement and philosophy, and she's had all sorts of higher functioning activities, and they're married to each other. So I think you'll agree with me, on the face of it, not a very good shidduch, because they have no joint interests at all. All the things that he's interested in, she isn't interested in, and all the things that she wants, he doesn't understand at all. Right? Say Chazal, that is actually the guf and the neshama. The body, the physical body, is interested in its own pleasures and its own ego and its own survival, and its physical existence. And the neshama, all it wants is to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's all it wants. Rav Kook writes beautifully in one or two. Rav Kook wrote a whole sefer called Orot HaTefila. Beautiful, beautiful. And in his first paragraph, he says you should know that you think that you're davening sometimes during the day. You take out a few minutes to daven. He says the neshama is constantly davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The human neshama constantly, 24/7, is only doing one thing. It's connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're just not aware of it because you're focusing on all sorts of different things. The chachma of tefillah is to put aside, like the Maharal says, to close the door on all your other thoughts and activities and allow the neshama to do what comes naturally to it, which is to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why the bracha in the morning is we first thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we have a functional body, because otherwise, EF Shaliskai and Balama Lefanecha, we couldn't exist at all. And then he says, Va'ata b'shamra b'kirbi, you preserve the neshama within me. And then there's a very interesting line here, which I won't go into for the moment, but that's part of our emunah. It says, Va'ata osid litlo mimeni ulachziro bi la'osid lava. And that neshama I'm going to give back to you. After 120, I'm going to give it back to you, and then it's going to come back to me in a very short paragraph, right, of 5 lines. In the morning, the very first thing, we already encompass an entire philosophy of life, right? We have a functioning body, which is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we have a neshama, which has an eternal future, right? And then he says, Kol Zaman, Shanashama B'kirbi, so long as the neshama is within me, right? Meaning, so long as I am alive and my neshama is functional, Moda Ani Lefanecha, Hashem Elokai V'Elokei Avosai. The goal is Modeh Ani Lefanecha. That's what I said. A large part about tefillah is not about asking for anything. It's simply about gratitude and acknowledging that what we have in life, the most precious things we have in life, are gifts from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that acknowledgement itself is an act of emunah. Every tefillah strengthens our emunah that we are thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ribon kol ha'maisim, Adon kol ha'neshamas, and the Gemara and the pasuk ends, Baruch Atum Hashem, Hamachazir neshabos v'gorim meisim. What is that a reference to? So he translates it as, he restores the soul. He restores souls to the dead, right? So at one level, maybe that's talking about Tchias HaMeisim, which is in the Messianic world, somehow the resurrection of the dead. But actually on a more immediate level, it's talking simply about a human being who's been fast asleep. And when he's asleep, he's unconscious. And in the morning, the neshama is once again switched on, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu restores the neshama, lifgorim meisim, to a body that was sort of non-functional. When you were asleep, you were dead to the world. And we're thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So basically, what are we doing here in these 2 brachas? And with this, I'll end the share for today. These are classic examples. 2 brachas, body and soul. When you wake up in the morning, if you don't do anything else, you just make these 2 brachas slowly and carefully and think about them, it'll change your day. It'll change your day because you'll understand that we have these gifts, the gift of life from God, and we've got a functional body and a soul that can connect us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is really the greatest possible gift that we could receive. I'm going to be looking, please go to the next share, at the brachas that we say before Kriya Shema. The brachas of Kriya Shema, Hameya La'oretz and Ava Rabbah, are some of the most fascinating brachas, which have got a tremendous amount of content to them. And please God, my goal is next week we'll have a closer look at that. But that's all I have for today. And don't forget this pasuk from Yeshaya that I started with, right? The Chamosayich Yerushalayim Mifkalati Shamrim. At this time of year, we are reminding ourselves of how precious the land of Israel and Yerushalayim is to us. And it's only because we've done this every day, every year, and indeed every day in our davening, that we resisted the temptation to live anywhere else in the world. And wherever we've lived, we've said, I was 35 years the Rav of the Shul in London, and I repeatedly mentioned in my drushes that wherever a Jew lives in the globe, wherever he is Baderech. He's on the way. He's on the way to Eretz Yisrael, and even here in Eretz Yisrael, we are on the way to Yerushalayim, Habanuya, to the rebuilding of Yerushalayim, and that is really what Tisha B'Av is all about. But we're going to meet again, I think, before Tisha B'Av. Next Wednesday is